Welcome to The Chemical Show, the podcast where chemical means business. I'm your host, Victoria Meyer, bringing you stories and insights from leaders driving innovation and growth across the chemical industry. Each week, we explore key trends, real-world challenges, and the strategies that make an impact. Let's get started. Today, I'm speaking with Peter Huntsman, who is the CEO of Huntsman Corporation, here at the Marsh North American Energy and Power Symposium, and Peter just gave a very lively keynote, which brought some contrary views, but also some necessary views into the industry. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and one that I've been hoping to have for a long time. So Peter, thank you for joining me on The Chemical Show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So just give me a little brief overview to you and to Huntsman Corporation for those that may or may not be aware of it.
Well, the business was obviously started by my father, and we actually started as a plastics packaging business. My father said that starting in the early 1980s, that getting into the plastic side of the packaging, the plastics manufacturing, that's where the money was going to be made. I'm not sure that was necessarily, has been proven to be the case.
It was styrofoam clamshells. Am I right about that?
Well, yes. He originally started with 8 cartons. My father originally started, when they were first married, selling eggs. He had an uncle that he worked with that gathered up all the eggs from the local farmers around Los Angeles. They'd bring them in. They had a huge number of these eggs that were breaking on the way. They couldn't be transported and so forth. And so they started a joint venture between Dow Chemical, D.O., and Olson Brothers, which is my father's uncles. Olson Brothers, Dow and Olson together was Dolco, D-O-L-C-O. And that was the name of one of the very first packaging businesses that had styrofoam 8 cartons.
Yeah.
And from there, that's the barriers to entry getting into plastic packaging is not all that high.
Yeah.
They originally went into to build soup bowls out of plastics.
Yeah.
And that didn't sell very well. And so they melded the sides of them. They made a clamshell out of it. And originally they tried to sell those to Avon. Because women, at the end of the day, would come home. This is what the advertising said. I'm not trying to sound sexist. As women come home, they want to put their earrings and they want to take all their jewelry off and put it in someplace convenient. So we'll put it in this clamshell. Now, that didn't sell very well.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me that
didn't take off. And eventually, they went to McDonald's. McDonald's said that was a terrible idea. We'll never put a burger in that. So they went to Burger King. Burger King put their worst-selling ham and cheese sandwich out of Miami into this, and they found that it was able to keep the warmth of the burger. Yeah. They could pre-produce and therefore have a fresher burger.
Yeah.
And most importantly, the material that these were made out was 100% recyclable. So all the environmental groups loved it. It's better than that waxy paper that can't be recycled and so forth. And then McDonald's came and said, why didn't you bring this to us? And then eventually we went from packaging into the plastics production.
Right, and then acquired many, many other companies and then shifted and transformed.
Acquired about 50. So I like to think of the arc of the company. It's very similar to the arc of the chemical industry.
Yeah.
We started in grades of plastics that made clamshell containers for hamburgers.
Yeah.
And today, every Boeing 787 flying will have about 20 tons of Huntsman or Huntsman-related materials per plane.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of what the chemical industry's done. We've gone from cheap packaging all the way to where you cannot build an airplane today without our materials.
Yeah.
Space travel, EVs, renewable energy, all of this is made possible through our industry.
That's awesome, and it's so cool. So, and that's a great segue. So, you're talking today about the role of chemicals in maybe energy transition, but in a carbon economy, right? So I know you said quite vehemently there is no such thing as carbon neutrality, but we can be smart with our carbon, right? So why is this so critical? What is critical about chemicals today?
Well, I'm always just a bit bemused in that most of the policymakers are looking to get away from hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
Chemical industry, think about this. There's very few products we produce today that we were making 10 years ago. Paper can't say that. Steel can't say that. Most manufacturing processes can't say that.
Yeah.
Timber industry, so forth. What we make today in the chemical industry, we replace. We're continuously coming out. Think of something as simple as a bottle of water.
Yeah.
Remember the plastic containers came out with water. Now those things are so thin, you get it in your hand and you're afraid that it's just going to come apart.
Yes.
That's how thin it is. We're saving hydrocarbons, we're saving money, we have efficiencies. I don't know of another industry that manufactures. Now, I know tech and chips. I'm moving that to one side here.
Yeah.
But when I think, if you could see the sort of manufacturing proficiency in the steel, cement, wood, energy industry that you've seen in the chemical industry, that's what's so phenomenal about this industry is we are the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you point out, so many of the products that are being used readily today were not around a decade ago or
and they
2
won't be here
decades
10
ago.
years from now.
Right.
We'll have something better.
And all the things that, from a consumer perspective, we've grown accustomed to, whether it be phones, whether it be, these microphones that we're using today, whatever, are foundationally part of the chemical industry, right? There's so many critical components that go into it that, frankly, the majority of the world doesn't really recognize. But you and I recognize that, which is a good thing. So one of the things you've talked about is just some of the challenges and hurdles in getting these new products approved, right? So there's so many of the innovations that are taking place. We know that we need these innovations to support our future economies, whether it be EVs, whether it be airplanes and aerospace and the new technologies that we want. And yet, it seems like it's really a challenge. Maybe we can design them, but to get them approved for use. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the EPA today has 90 days by law. That was the Frank Lautenberg Act that they have 90 days. It's a bipartisan bill that was passed, 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to reform how you regulate chemicals and at the same time how you approve chemicals.
Yeah.
I've been a chief executive officer for over 20 years. I rarely have ever heard CEOs complain about the overregulation of our industry as much as the regulations that just don't make sense. And so when you're trying to regulate something and you've got 90 days to regulate, we've got some products in the United States right now that have been on that wait list now 2 or 3 years. And so I can go to China and I can probably get not only the approval virtually within a matter of weeks, but I probably get some subsidies from the government to build a new process, new technologies. I mean, they incentivize you to bring new technologies over there for a whole host of reasons, right?
Right.
And we're sitting over here thinking, well, if you really want to get beyond forever chemicals, you really want to get beyond perhaps some of the more toxic products that were made decades ago, we're constantly innovating. Yeah. But if you don't have the means and the ability to get that approved quickly and efficiently, and maybe even incentivized to replace those sort of things. Maybe we get the front of the line if you have something that's going to be replacing yesterday's state-of-the-art chemistry.
Yeah.
And so as we look at this, it just seems today that the EPA seems to be more interested in buying electric buses that don't work for school districts than they are getting the next generation of cleaner, more efficient, more effective chemistries and building blocks approved and into the market.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I know I recently was at HCPA, the Household and Consumer Products Association meeting, and there was a lot of conversation there about concerns about the new administration coming in and what it means for the EPA, opportunities, obviously, as we get into a new administration, which we're just, days away from. How do you see this, and how do you and other CEOs like yourself influence the opportunity for a more effective EPA? How do you look at these changes that are afoot in Washington?
I'm not sure that there's a lot of immediate impact on that. And I say that because when we build a chemical plant, you're building a plant that's going to be around for at least 30 or 40 years. So you're making an investment today, and you're really saying, where are we going to be 20, 30 years from now? Because that's when the plant's probably going to be totally sold out.
Right.
It's going to take a couple of years to permit. If you and I decided today that we're going to go out and build $1 billion ethylene plant or anything, you're probably looking at 2 or 3 years to be able to permit, to be able to engineer it, another 2 or 3 years to be able to build it, and so forth. So you're looking at 5, 6, 7 years. If it's a product like MDI polyurethanes, you're probably looking at closer to a decade.
No kidding.
So we're going to make $1 billion today. We're going to make that decision today for a plant that won't even be running for almost a decade. And then it's going to run for another 30 years after that. So I've got to be able to look today and say, where I'm building this facility, I need to be able to look 40 years down the road.
So how do you handle that? Because there's a certain amount of regulatory uncertainty. So there's always the business uncertainty, in terms of the markets there. Is it the right product, right place, right markets? Is it profitable? But then you add this regulatory risk onto it. which is a risk, not just in the U.S. and Europe, else, frankly, probably around the globe, different regions, different places. But how do you assess that risk and incorporate that into those decisions?
It's a real challenge. I wish I could say that there's an easy answer to this. One of the questions that was asked, you may have heard earlier, was somebody got up and said that free enterprise and democracies were the enemy because they're both short-term oriented. That they're the enemy of the solutions of what we need to change climate issues and so forth. Well, I take just the opposite approach to that. I think government has been one of the most ruinous. So if I look back in the United States, Huntsman, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the production when the Clean Water Act came out in the 1990s. Remember when we had to have MTBE?
Yeah.
It was mandated you had to have and oxygenate your gasoline. Our industry spent billions and billions of dollars. Exxon, Huntsman, Lyondell. Great companies spent billions of dollars building these facilities within a few years. It not only was it no longer mandated, but it wasn't even permitted because of legal liabilities and so forth. So I can go through line in scripture of the government mandates that have come out, whether it's on aerosol usage or whether it's on hydrocarbons, and the amount of money that goes directly from the government into NGOs' pockets that are fighting the chemical industry. People like Mayor Bloomberg, he's spending hundreds of millions of dollars of his own money to get beyond petrochemicals. This is a guy that has multiple private jets, multiple homes around. He's got to be a huge customer of ours. I mean, of all the products and everything. And he's spending all this money to try to ban the solutions to what we have in society.
I know. It's really ironic. It's ironic, and I think it's a function of the fact that people don't actually understand how things are built, where products come from, what it might be, right? There's just this sheer lack of understanding. And maybe it's a bit of it's somebody else's problem, or if I just make a bold statement, it's all going to magically fix itself. It's a conundrum, for sure.
It is, and I have an opportunity to speak usually every other month or so at a university, and invariably I'll get a student that'll stand up and say, I want you to know I'm opposed to the chemical industry and I'm boycotting your industry. And I'll look at them and I'll say, what do you mean you're boycotting it? I don't know, how do you do that? Well, I don't use plastic bags anymore. I've got a canvas bag. Okay, well, we haven't produced plastic for either the bag or the plastics go into the bag for decades.
Yeah.
But you're wearing our product, you're eating our product, your anxiety medicine you're probably taking is our product, your eyeglasses, your computer, your skateboard you've got there, clothes, shoes, everything, the air conditioning coming in, everything in this. And when people, you said earlier, maybe they've just forgotten how things are made. Yeah. There seems we're so detached from. It used to be the majority of our population was just in agriculture. Now it's less than 5% is actually in the production of food that feeds the world.
Yeah. Or even manufacturing overall, right? Because if you think about how efficient our manufacturing processes are, many people are not in manufacturing anymore. They're just in consumption.
That's right.
Yeah.
You look at how much of our GDP today is around the financial services, where you're just basically moving money around, right? A lot of what tech is. Apple does not build this phone, right? They license it to be built. They have a third party that builds it, but Apple themselves, they don't build this phone. They own the technology. I download apps, they make money. Yeah. It's a brilliant business model they have, but they're not making the phones. Yeah. These companies that we think even manufacture today, most of them don't, and they'll sub it out to somebody else.
Right. So you talked a little bit about Europe today, and frankly, it's a European problem, right? And I know that you've addressed the fact that as we look at what's going on in Europe seems to be anti-manufacturing, whether it's intentional or it's the function of misguided policies. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you see going on there, and how are you and Huntsman approaching business in Europe today?
Well, unfortunately, we're approaching it in that we have been cutting costs now for the last, really since about 2021. You start to see record high. This is the year before Putin invaded Russia. This was, remember when all those really smart people went to Glasgow at one of the environmental summits and told us all how to live our lives? Yeah. It was during that summer, right, that you started to see a high pressure goes over Europe. There's not enough wind to produce the electricity. They start burning gas. It's going into the next winter's storage. And electrical prices the summer before the invasion go to historical high prices.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. I despise what he's done in Ukraine. I'm not saying that has had zero impact. What I'm saying is that much of where we are in Europe is a problem of their own making. And what they have done is simply put, is that they have legislated and set targets with no real achievable way to get there.
Yeah.
Now, aspirational targets are fine, but when you start telling people this is going to cost you your jobs, you start telling people to shut down your facilities, you start getting to a point where hundreds of thousands of people, look what's taking place in the automotive sector and so forth today. Europe does not stand a chance of competing against the Chinese with EVs.
Do you think it's fixable?
No.
Is the European situation fixable at this point?
Not at the present time. I've talked to government leaders there where I've asked them, if tomorrow somebody came out today and just proved the science incorrect with climate, would you change? Most of them said no, we wouldn't. This is a way of life for us. This is where we want to be. This is our reason for existence. And which always just astounds me, because I'm not sure if it's not climate driven, why are you doing this?
Yeah. Well, and I do feel bad for all the employees that are no longer have jobs because manufacturing sites have shut down. You use the analogy of what it costs to take a shower in Germany and the UK. It's hard to be a citizen there in some respects. In many respects, it's great. I love Europe. I love to visit Europe, right?
Look,
Wonderful place.
I've lived 7 years of my life in Europe. I've raised a bunch of my kids through the European school system and so forth.
But the industrial policies today are just
terrible.
Very difficult.
The energy policies that filter into the industrial policies. Yeah. And what you're going to see is just this massive dislocation, relocation of manufacturing eventually. Okay. And where the chemicals go, where steel, chemical, and energy goes, that's where manufacturing's got to follow. Yeah. And when I say manufacturing, I go all the way down, where are the Apples, the Googles, the Nvidias in Europe today? Yeah. They're not there. And the sad thing is with AI coming on, you've got plenty of smart people in Europe. You've got a great education system that is there. I'm not criticizing any of that. Yeah. But AI is going to exist because of data. Data is going to exist because of power, because of the electrons that generate the data. Yeah. That's going to exist because you have competitive raw materials for energy. Right. And so you're going to see massive data centers. You're seeing it today. This isn't a projection. In China, coal. In the Middle East, oil. And in the U.S., gas, not nuclear. I mean, I hope eventually it gets there, but it's not nuclear. You cannot run a data center on wind. It can be part of your portfolio, yes, but it's not going to be exclusively on wind. And as you think about this, the whole next generation of AI is going to be coming from those three regions. Now, not exclusive to those three regions. There's going to be isolated incidences, I get it, but the vast majority of AI is going to be coming from China, it's going to come from the Middle East, and it's going to be coming from the data centers that are built there and in the United States. Yeah. And so it's not just a question of where you want to produce your steel or where you want to produce your automobiles. It's also the next generation of information, technology, of medical science, of space and so forth. That's what Europe is missing out on today. Yeah. And what should be built today is not going to be built.
Yeah, and it gets back to your earlier comment on free enterprise, right?
That's right.
So free enterprise, innovation, and rewarding that innovation and the problem solving, the opportunities that we're seeing, and that with the less regulation or maybe appropriate regulation, we enable that to happen.
Yeah, and they've got to go hand in glove. That's why I say I'm not opposed to regulation. I'm really not. I mean, our industry needs it.
Yes.
I'm just opposed to when it becomes non-science and when it becomes too emotional or political. And both sides of the aisle will do it.
Let's talk a little bit about business transformation, because you referenced the fact that you guys are fundamentally, Huntsman is fundamentally pulling away in many ways from Europe because of the business environment makes it difficult. As a company, you're leading a dramatically different company today than you were 20 years ago. Growing businesses, selling businesses, changing businesses. What have you found to be really successful in helping to align your organization, align your customers through these transformations that you've led the company through?
Well, I think you've got to, first of all, you've got to come into work every morning. You've got to be ready to take your portfolio and I don't like to use the phrase blow it up because in the chemical industry that has really bad connotations.
Maybe.
But you've got to be ready and willing to take it apart.
Yeah.
If Huntsman were the same company today that it was just 10 years ago, we'd be bankrupt. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, since that time, the last 15 years, we've shrunk the size of our company by about 40%. And we have a much stronger balance sheet. We have more product innovation that's taking place today than ever before. We got out of all the polystyrene, the styrenics. We got out of polyethylene, polypropylene. We used to be one of the top 5 producers in North America on that. All of the olefins and aromatics, TiO2, our intermediates business, surfactants business, our textile businesses. We've sold all of those.
That's
and
dramatic.
We've doubled down and we've expanded in aerospace, adhesions, and so forth. And we're going to continue to do that. The shareholders may ask, are we content where the portfolio is today? No, of course not. We've got to continue to rip it apart. We've got to continue to find opportunities. Now at the bottom of a cycle where we are today, it's rather difficult to say that.
Challenging.
But the time to sell and transform your assets are when you're just coming out of that trough, which I think we're just about there.
Hope so.
And I think that there's a lot more transformation. We're going to look a lot more like our epoxies, adhesion, aerospace. Even in Europe, those are good businesses today.
Yeah.
Right? Energy conservation. And we're going to look a lot less like commodity MDI and commodity urethane products and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are in a period of transformation,
Yes.
certainly, and certainly Huntsman is definitely
You have
right
to- you
there.
have to be.
be.
That's right.
Yeah, change or be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. Aside from the fact that your name is on the company, so there's obviously, there's a family legacy for you in Huntsman Corporation, but that's not a guarantor of success. Are there some characteristics or things that you really attribute to being a successful leader of a company?
It's a good question because there's just so many different attributes depending on the company, the profile, and so forth of it. I became president, I became chief executive back when we were private, and our family owned the majority of the company. And my father, for all intents and purposes, from an operating point of view, stepped aside about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Back when we were still in plastics and polystyrene and so forth. You look at the transformation that's taken place since then. I think it's really important to look at the macro global trends. One of the reasons I wanted to get out of polyolefins and out of polystyrene, out of these heavy chemicals, I saw that we were competing more against countries than we were against companies.
Yeah,
I mean, I know Reliance in India is not owned by the government, but try going and building 1 million barrel a day refinery in India as an outsider. You're probably not going to get the same sort of incentives that Reliance would get.
Yeah.
And look, we do the same thing in this country as well.
Yeah.
Somebody like Japan, a very close ally, wants to come in and buy a steel asset. We tell them you can't do that. At least the current president says that. So I think you've got to look at the large macro trends.
Yeah.
What do you bring that's unique to your industry?
Yeah.
What can you do that private equity can't do, or a government entity? And I think the most important thing, particularly for me, and it's very easy for me, is to hire people. Surround yourself with people that are smarter, people that are better than you. Like I said, that's an easy thing for me to be able to do because I can always find smarter people and people that have better ideas and so forth. So I think if I've done a good job at anything, it's listening to them, it's taking in, having a culture where you can say, yeah, that's a good idea, but how about if we looked at it a different way? How about if we did something differently? And you've got to be able to have an open dialogue. You've got to be able to have an imagined team where you can have a debate and you can do that without insulting people and do it outside of an element of fear.
Yeah. It's great. Did you always know that you wanted to be in chemicals, right? Because while that's one of the family businesses, I know that your siblings all are leading different parts of the Huntsman empire, if I can call it that, or in politics or in public life in different ways. Did you know?
Well, there was a point for probably about 15 years where all of my siblings were in the company together. And
how was that?
Yeah, well,
am I allowed to ask that?
Yeah, people ask that all the time. I can genuinely say I never had a major disagreement, never had an argument with any of my siblings.
That's great.
We might have disagreed on decisions that were being made past, but we'd always, in private, shut the door, sit down, talk through our differences. And I attribute a lot of that to my father. I mean, he put the family, the relationships in the family and so forth came before anything else, that loyalty and so forth. If I could is a public company, it doesn't make any sense. But if I could have all my siblings, my brothers and sisters coming back into the company and working with them again, I'd do it in a second.
Yeah.
I started in the company as a truck driver, and I used to deliver fuels and pick up fuels in refineries. And I was always fascinated with refining. And when I was waiting in line to load up, I got to meet I got to meet people in the refinery. They'd take me around and show you how a cat cracker works, and how all these
all the stuff.
coking units and alkylation units and so forth. And I was just fascinated with all those processes. Started buying some books on engineering and process design, teaching myself how do you go from crude oil to gasoline to asphalt oil, and then subsequently into chemicals. Yeah. And it was our family, when I started the company, our family had kind of two companies. One of them was a plastics company. The other one was a trucking gas station company. And I rose to the point where I was running the gas station trucking side of the business and tried to convince my dad, true story, tried to convince him to get out of the chemical business. Our future would be in trucking gas stations, especially with 7-Eleven. They were talking about they'd always be going out of business. Circle K, we could buy it. This is back in the 80s. My father said, we can only take one of these paths. And I presented what I thought was a very compelling argument as to why we ought to get out of plastics and get into trucking. He came on a Monday. We did this on a Thursday or Friday. He came on a Monday and he said, I'm going to go with the plastic side. I was devastated. I thought for sure he'd pick the local trucking. I mean, this is a great business. And it was, you could see and feel and touch the products. It's chemical
which is
stuff.
really nice.
It was really cool stuff. And he said, last night I had one of our neighbors, I tell you the name of the neighbor, but he's still alive, so I won't. One of our neighbors called me up and said he went by one of our convenience stores and bought a box of Raisin Bran, and it was stale. I said, yeah, who goes and buys a perishable item at a grocery store or at a gas station?
Right.
My father said, Peter, I don't want to be in a business where my neighbors are calling me over a stale box of Raisin Bran. He said, I want to be in a local business. I want to be in something that's global and something that's not in my backyard. So we sold all the gas stations, trucking and everything. We put that money into chemicals.
And did you know that you were going to stay and do chemicals at that point?
I was really discouraged. I thought this is just devastating. I went and talked to a company called Sinclair. Used to be run by Earl Holding. And I went and actually met with Earl Holding at the time and he was kind of like, you crazy? Your father's got this great company. Go work for your father. You're not part of my family, because his family was running the company. And my dad, we just bought a polypropylene plant in New Jersey. And so I got a job in the New Jersey chemical plant in charge of quality and production, went out and figured out how plastics were made. And within a year or so, I was just kind of like, this is the future. It is terrific.
The future, right? That was the line in The Graduate, wasn't it? The future is chemicals or plastics? Yeah,
that's right. It's been a great thing for our family. My father took his estate when he passed away in 2016 and put it into a foundation that virtually not all of it, most of that money goes into cancer research and mental health. And the second generation runs that board that manages that foundation. And now we're starting to do likewise with our resources and so forth. So this industry, not only has it afforded, I think, tens of thousands of people employment within the company and innovation, what we've done with Huntsman Corporation, but the proceeds and the stock values and so forth have gone to, I hope, the betterment of society, which is really the best dividend I think our company can ever have.
I think it is a phenomenal legacy that your family has been able to build and you've participated in.
Glad to be part of the trade here.
Absolutely. So what advice do you have for young people entering the industry that want to be part of its success and its transformation? What advice would you have to a new person saying, should I come join this chemical company, and how do I have a great career?
That's really tough. But one thing that my father and then subsequently I did when I was president was when my younger siblings came in, they all went and worked in a facility somewhere. They all went and worked in a chemical plant. All of us have I was in New Jersey. My brother James was in Beaumont, Texas. My brother David was in Odessa, Texas. Brother Paul was in Australia. So it was. They all went and worked in different places, and they all understood what it was like to work in a chemical plant. How did it actually work? How did it function? So forth. It's one thing to sell chemicals. One thing to look at it as part of your portfolio. It's quite another thing to understand how are the molecules bent. How do you actually do that? And who are the people that actually do that for you? Right. And can you relate to them? They're the people that are going to give you the productivity. They're the people who give you the quality, the innovation, the speed, and so forth.
Yeah.
They're the people, when a customer runs out, they'll put a product in the back of their pickup, and they'll run it out there personally because of the pride they have in the company. And that's what differentiates Huntsman from its competitors or the individual people that work in our company.
Love it. Well, Peter, thank you so much for this.
Thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed spending
Been a
time
delight
with you today.
speaking with you.
Nice
Thank you.
meeting you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Keep listening, keep following, keep sharing, and we will talk with you again soon. Thanks for joining us today on The Chemical Show. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, share it with your friends and colleagues. For more insights, visit thechemicalshow.com and connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find me at Victoria King Meyer on LinkedIn, and you can also find us at The Chemical Show Podcast. Join us next time for more conversations and strategies shaping the future of the industry. We'll see you soon.